Hello, hello again. Welcome back to the studio. As you could see a moment ago on our screen, joining me now, you have Alexandra Zailovic, Labour Market Outreach Facilitator, IOM, and we have Anna Schlesinger, Senior Program Associate at IOM, and the topic of the conversation covers labour migration, business and human rights. So the big question is, we all know the connection between business and human rights. Why all of a sudden labour migration? How is it relevant? Tell me.
Well, labor migration is relevant in general, right?
Of course. But there's a reason we have this topic.
There is a reason.
What is it?
Currently, there is 169 migrant workers in the world.
169
million migrant workers. So it means that 1 in 20 of a worker is a migrant worker. It's around 5% of the global workforce. So let's agree on the fact that migration is happening, right? Like it's happening for various reasons. People migrate because they simply want to improve their lives, because they might want to escape the results of climate change. And migration is simply a human right. But migration can also benefit global economics. That's why we are talking about it in terms of business and human rights. So there is even more economical angles to look at migration. For example, if you look at the data showing international remittances, there was an increase of 500% in the last 22 years in the number, the global number of remittances to 800 billion US dollars. So it's a huge number. It shows the impact on global economics.
And how? Yeah, please finish.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing about how it can also fill the employment gaps, especially in aging societies of the global north. So it is a lot of potential, right? It's just very important to in order to harness this potential, we need to understand the migration itself and its complexity.
Speaking of complexity, we're living in a world where there's been much talk and excitement around globalization, and we see some reverse trends, no doubt, globally, especially in countries that set the trends for the world to watch. But my question is really around complexity, as you mentioned. What makes this conversation especially complex?
Labor migration process is a very complex process that involves different stages. And actually, the migration process starts well before than the migration journey. And I will go a little bit into details to present all the stages. So we will start from the recruitment in the country of origin. This is the first stage. It means the situation when a candidate is looking for job opportunities, navigating the recruitment agencies and potential employers. The second stage is the pre-departure orientation. And here we mean securing all the appropriate documents, work permits, visas, and especially just generally understanding of the terms of the employment. And only then we have the stage of migration journey. So this is the traveling to the country of destination, often, unfortunately, facing different challenges on its way. As a first stage, we have employment in the country of destination. So this is the moment of the adaptation to a new cultural environment and also social and economical integration. Sometimes in the whole this migration process, this may be the last stage, but we should also remember about the stage of return migration or onward migration, if applicable, of course. Each of this stage involves different stakeholders, legal frameworks, and of course it challenges. That is why this comprehensive understanding is required to manage it effectively.
Right. But one could argue the world hasn't changed that much in that regard. These processes have been there for a while. Anna, would you add anything to the complexity aspect of it?
Well, I can add that the biggest challenge of this complexity is its risks, and the fact that the risks are basically, they can occur on basically every stage of migration.
Right.
And it's never fun to talk about the risks, but I think it's very important in this conversation.
You cannot be successful in anything if you don't understand the risks,
exactly.
Including this entire DI success story or failure story.
Exactly. This is the entry point, really, to understand the risks that can occur in the processes that you're dealing with. So the biggest, if we're talking about the risks, I would say that the biggest risk, which is the result of the complexity of migration, can be the recruitment fees. So recruitment fees are basically all the costs that have to be covered during the recruitment process.
Which is typically external agencies, I would imagine?
Well, this is the thing. The cost can be either covered by the employer, the end employer, or the migrant itself. And this is the biggest risk because, for example, the International Labour Organization data shows that the recruitment costs can be up to 9 times monthly salary of a worker. So if the worker has to cover the cost, basically they end up in the situation where they have to be working for months to pay back the loan. And this is basically bonded labor, which is one of the types of forced labor.
One way of saying slavery, pretty much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If I may. So forced labor is a risk. Yeah, over 25 million people globally experienced forced labor, with nearly 10 million of people being migrants. So many of people facing their bad conditions of work due to deceptive recruitment practices and simply just due to the lack of the protection, of the legal protection. When we are talking about the risks, we should also take into account the illegal employment. Illegal employment fuels the informal economy, where workers may be paid under the table, avoiding the tax paying, avoiding the paying of social security contributions. And many migrants, without appropriate documents, are left unsecured and very vulnerable to different types of exploitation, which also may be, unfortunately, human trafficking.
And as irony would have it, this happens even with the wealthiest example-setting brands on the planet. So I suppose it's a huge risk. So my question is, how do you mitigate this risk from company level? What can you do, like genuinely address it, not sugarcoat it?
Well, that's probably the most difficult question, right?
That's what we're meeting for.
Because obviously there are so many activities that business can implement, everything from policies, procedures, but also like more fun things, workshops, trainings, promoting inclusive language, right? Don't get me wrong, they're very important, they're crucial, but they might not be enough if basic human rights are violated. And if
the mighty, the big, the respected also do that. So how do we mitigate it, essentially? What would be your first priority?
Yeah, let me give you an example, right? If you want to look at the core processes, you have to really do a deep dive into it to understand complexity of your processes. So there was one company that used this tool, which is called Labor Migration Process Mapping. And that's a very hands-on tool which helps you to understand the processes, to understand how the recruitment was, how it looked. And it gives an opportunity to, if you find this like imperfect processes, to fix them, to grow, to get better. Because it's not really a shame to find these imperfect processes. It is a shame, though, to look away, right? And this company even they started remedies because they were committed to the employer pays principle. And that's another good practice itself. Employer pays principle, and I go back to this bonded labor and the risks of recruitment costs covered by the worker, because employer pays principle is basically already a well-established trend, or even like a, let's say, trend of global brands who committed to cover all the costs of recruitment, which means that the worker doesn't have to pay for it. And this principle is not only important because it basically prevents bonded labor from happening, but also because it proves the company's commitment to ethical standards. So all the risks we talked about before, there are risks for the workers, obviously, but there are also risks for the employer. because like any incidents of forced labor in global value chains, they might have huge repercussions from like legal to reputational as well.
Right, and I would imagine from what you're saying that this conversation really affects the majority of the majorities of people in the hierarchy of labor. So that's why it's especially important, I guess. People who are the most vulnerable ones on the job market, when you're talking about people who are more senior, towards the C-suite, so to say, it's a very different story, obviously. But these are not the biggest number. This is not where the problem is situated. Agnieszka mentioned in the previous panel, we're facing those cognitive biases. We're living in an increasingly entrenched world. As you can see from the global public discourse, we are also somehow, because of the technology around us, more inclined perhaps to turn a blind eye just to stay with whatever ideology, perspective, or values we subscribe to. This is making the conversation even more difficult. Lots of whataboutism going on. Karina, would you add anything to how do we mitigate this risk perspective?
I think that Anna covered it all, but what I would like to add about the benefits for the business, because I think that it's very important and very shortly. This is, of course, enhanced reputation. By aligning with the human rights principles, business may build the trust among the clients. This trust may also have a positive impact on their market expansion, but not only among the clients, also among the ethically minded candidates who value social responsibility. Another benefit, which is very important, is talent attraction and retention. So the commitment to diversity and human rights principle make your company more attractive for candidates, for top talent. So migrants bring in unique skills, different approaches, different perspectives. It has a positive impact on innovation and problem-solving processes in the companies.
So there's the thing about reputation, I guess. It takes a second to destroy it completely, and it takes decades to build it, even for an experienced company. So what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that ironically enough, the biggest responsibility is not with corporate leadership, it's with the success of awareness at top employee level, so that they don't want to work for companies who have smeared reputation, especially on the labor front. Is that what you're saying?
The success is to understand the complexity of this process, in order not only the complexity of this process, but also the risks we can face.
Karina, I think people do understand the complexity. They just choose to turn a blind eye. There's an old saying which goes, ignorance is bliss. Sometimes we all want to be ignorant, don't we?
Yeah, I would like to add one example of this ignorance. I would prefer to give an example of a good practice. However, that's something which is quite, I guess, close to each of us. We all know football. In Qatar in 2022, there was the highest percentage of players who were born in a country that they were representing another country that they were born in. It was 17% of all the players. So they became an asset. They migrated, they became an asset. They became successful at the same time, however. In the same time, they were playing on stadiums which were built with forced labor, basically, by migrant workers. And there is a huge difference between harnessing the potential of diversity, of migration, and between just exploiting it. And the responsibility is obviously also in the hands of people who can change the most, right? Who are the decision makers.
I couldn't agree more, personally, and I'm sure the great majority of our audience would as well. Anna, Karina, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us. Thank you. Our time is up. Thank you.